Been away for several days now, and so I'm looking forward to spending time back in Tifton, Georgia, where I'm from in South Georgia. But again, this is a passion of mine. This is something that, if you remember, in 2010, I was a candidate for this very same office. And so education has been something that's been very, passionate in my life. And as, I come to you as a candidate, I kind of like to say, I'm the no-nonsense, common-sense type candidate. Because education is what I've been involved with really since the day that I ended, my high school career. Because, at that time, I constantly worked with kids, within my church, looking at a youth group as a Sunday school teacher, youth leader, missions, and eventually kind of, went on, into education. And again, where I spent 22 years working in public education down in Irwin County. But, one of the things I found as an educator and as your next state school superintendent, my goal is to make sure that all of our kids receive a diploma. But it's not just a diploma that is a piece of paper that you can hang up on the wall. But I want it to be something that actually means something. That when they hold that in their hand, that they receive opportunity. And it's opportunity for three things as we look at this. That first of all, it is opportunity to continue their education. That once they begin, look at, to say, do I have the opportunity to attend the military, technical college, vocational, business training, a university and things of this nature, which for the most part I've attended just about all of those that I mentioned. Because learning is a lifetime experience. Just this past year, I was taking classes online. So I know the value of education and what it does open, and it does open up opportunity. But also when you get that diploma, I want our kids to be able to say that, hey, I can get a job. Because a job is important because it means, opening up doors and, for a lifetime on down the road. So they have to have that skill set for employers. A lot of employers look at me today and say, Richard, a lot of our kids don't have, some of the basic skills that we used to take for granted that we have. And so we have to, give them that skill set. Because eventually our goal is to make sure they become good business leaders. That they become small business owners, such as myself today. Because you look at that, the engine that drives, our local communities is small business. And so we want those people. We want them to stay home. Definitely down there in rural Georgia where we're at, we love for our kids to come back, and to help build and keep our communities the way, thriving is the way it should be. And lastly, we want to make sure that our kids have the opportunity to live the American dream, to make those decisions, be good citizens, to be interactive, so that when they see candidates, that they know what is right and what is wrong. We look at Washington, D.C., there's a lot of wrong up there. One of the things I talk about and what we have talked about before is just something basic as the Constitution. Our kids need to know what the Constitution stands for. It's a short document. You look at it, you can read it, within just a few short minutes. But it's a wonderful document that many, unfortunately, our kids and even within our society don't know. So we have to do that job and re-instruct that, because that's what I used to teach. I was a social studies teacher. And so that was something that was very passionate to me, to make sure that my kids knew about our founding fathers and our document. But how do we get there? As I said, coming back with common sense, and again, with no nonsense here, we have to have solutions. And that was part of my tenure as a teacher. I was about solutions, trying to solve problems. How was the best way that I could get the kids to learn. Even as a coach, preparing for the other team, how to get the best out of my kids. And so I come up basically with a 4-point plan. You have the the piece of paper, I think, in the seats, and I won't kind of bore you with that, but I'll kind of summarize it. But first of all, what I do know is that what I call that we have in Georgia, if we're going to improve education, we've got to control education. And that's why I basically say very quickly, common sense over common core. Now in 2010, when I was running as a Republican, I was the person, the Republican candidate, who stood up and said, race to the top and common core is wrong. There was no other candidate out there, again, beating that drum. I was the candidate that said, my justification is the Constitution of the United States. Because what I do understand is there is something called Article 1, Section 8 within the Constitution. It gives the federal government its enumerated powers. Education is not one. And so that means that we look back to the 9th and 10th Amendment and bring it back to the states. Now within the Georgia Constitution we have something called Article 8, and it deals with education. And so that lets me know when I start looking at there that yes, Georgia controls education. But more importantly, Georgia controls education at the local level. And that means as your next state school superintendent, I'm not here to tell you how to run your school system. I'm here to help you run your school system. Because what your kids need up here is something perhaps completely different what we need down in South Georgia in Irwin County, where I live in Tift County. And so that is my commitment. But again, as we started this race, for 2014, I was the first candidate to come out. And again, the first thing that was on my platform was, again, common sense over common core, saying the federal government has no jurisdiction and no right to tell Georgia what we need and what we need not to do. Because looking at somebody that came out of the No Child Left Behind system, again, everything I had to implement, I found out that the federal government was nothing but a bunch of bureaucrats who had no idea what education was about. And they tried to put it as a one-size-fits-all thing, and if any of you have kids, what you understand is that one size does not fit all, because kids are individual and they're different. And that leads me to the second point, that as far as what Georgia education, what our emphasis should be is our kids, and our kids. Because at the end of the day, if we fail our kids, we have failed as a system. And that means that what we need to go back to, again, when I started school, is that we need to personalize education and not standardize education. Because if we're going to personalize education, we can take the kid where they are and move them forward and make sure that we meet all their needs. Now, in order to meet all their needs, again, I'm a firm foundationalist. And that means that, for an individual, you look at my background, I have pre-K through 12th grade. I taught in high school, worked in administration, at the younger age, and some things I'll talk about a little bit later. But what I found out as a high school teacher, my kids knew content. Their problem was they could not read for comprehending. And so that means that what we need to address is back there on the front end. And so, things that I grew up with, things that you grew up with. And that is my commitment, that as your next state school superintendent, that our kids, they will fully understand and have to be proficient in reading, writing, and math by the time they leave 5th grade. If we don't catch them at those grades, they exponentially get further and further and further behind. Now, as an individual, that's something else I'm very passionate about is reading. And again, in literacy. Now, that is something that I grew up in a military family. I moved from East Coast to West Coast before we came back and eventually settled back home in Irwin County. But what I found out was my mother gave me books. I still have my complete collection of Dr. Seuss books sitting in my house. Okay, what I grew up. For some of you, you know red fish, blue fish, two fish, green fish, whatever. You understand that. But reading is the key that will unlock the doors of opportunity across the board. And so that is a commitment. And again, something that even my wife, who is a reading specialist, she has told me for years, said, Richard, if we can get our parents to take a book and read 5 minutes a night, we'll make all the difference in the world. And so with that vein, one of the things I've started to do is reach out to profit and nonprofit groups to say, listen, we need to make sure that we put books in the hands of our kids and our parents before they get into school. Because if we can get parents, if we can get volunteers to sit down and read with those kids, we increase their vocabulary. And if you look at what is one of the key successful metrics that we use in education, is looking at vocabulary. If our kids come in with a high vocabulary, their chance of succeeding and opportunity opens up. And so we need to do that. And so literacy is something I am passionate about. My goal is to make sure that we as a state become the #1 literate state in the nation. I will not settle for anything less. Because one of the things I've found out as far as education, I don't care what test you take, whether it's math, science, reading, PE, technical, whatever, there's one common denominator. You have to do what? Read. Okay? If I can teach a kid to read, I can teach them to do anything in the world. I will give them the opportunity. And so that is, what we look at doing that. But also, as I know we talked about, one size does not fit all. Well, that means that we need to give our kids choice again. When I was growing up and started school, we had things such as trade opportunities. We had opportunities to do mechanics, to do, FFA, farm work, what we used to call home ec, but I guess it's consumer science now. I'm kind of dating myself a little bit. But we gave our kids the opportunity to expand and become well-rounded. And we need to get back to that in Georgia. We need to offer these things to our kids. And one of the things, especially coming from a farm area, that I understand the value of that. I mean, my kids, when they came in, they loved to work on farm. They, tractors and everything else was there. And so we need to partnership with our local businesses to bring what I call apprenticeship opportunities to a kid. One of the things, if you look at history, apprenticeship opportunities were the backbone of how people originally got educated. And so we need to do that and work across the board with that. I've even met with Ag Commissioner Black. I hope to do the same with Labor Commissioner Mark Butler. And I said, listen, our agencies can work together and provide our kids the education that they need. And so that's what I want to look at. Expand those opportunities across the board. Do deeper partnerships. Do deeper partnerships with our existing post-secondary schools. One of the options I would love to see is that for kids who are ready, why not graduate school with a 2-year degree? Why not become ready? Not just say that, that 12th grade is the metric, but if our kids are ready, if it's something that will keep them engaged and give them a diploma and keep them excited about education, why hold them back? It's like putting a restrictor plate on a race car. I want to take that thing off and see how fast it goes. My dad, he loved my Corvette because when he got on there, we got to see how fast it went, okay? And that's what we need to do for our education. We need to unleash that and let our kids go and take them off. But also that means we expand their opportunity as far as, graduation and diploma selection. For years, Georgia had made the mistake, and again, partially due to No Child Left Behind, we said every child was going to college. Well, I got breaking news, that's not the case, okay? Not every child is going to go to college. Not every child wants to go to college, right? If they do, that is great. But we need to make sure that we have technical, vocational type diplomas, a general diploma, something that does a better job in meeting the needs of our special needs kids. Our special needs kids are drowning, folks, I'll tell you, because they are having to take the same thing that every child has to take. And their graduation rate is based on being able to bubble in some stupid test, okay? Where it should be based on what we call the IEP, or their individual education program, because it is tailored to them, and that's what we need to have, a tailor-made education system. And so we've got to do that. Now we're talking about personalized our education. Now the next part, really the next component of that, is our teachers. Now I'll tell you, as a teacher, when I first started off, I could close my door and I could teach. I could do anything I wanted to. I was not hampered by some test. Now because of that, my kids did well. I can tell you, if we do education right as a teacher, and I have the freedom to interact with my kids, tests take care of themselves. When I was in school, I never heard the word test. But I tell you, I received a darn good public education, from Georgia and the surrounding area. So again, I know what works in that area. So we have to be able to allow our teachers to once again close their door and teach. We have to free up this paperwork and this data collecting. Really, the only data collecting needs to be exchanged is between the school and the parent. Government has no jurisdiction in that. Like I said, and I know the governor passed an executive order to do that, but we need the legislation to step in and pass a law that says Georgia will not allow any information to be farmed out to somebody else that has no jurisdiction or no right to see what our children have and what personal information is there. And again, one of the things we look at that, hopefully somewhere down the road, if we want to really take on that beast, let's go ahead and just end and do away with the Federal Department of Education.
Amen.
It has no jurisdiction. I said it has nothing to do with education. And I remember, like I said, when somebody named Carter, who came down from my part of the state, please forgive me for that, all right? But, when he created that monstrosity, and for me as an educator, I have seen nothing good come out of Washington, D.C. that has a bearing on Georgia public education. And so we have to take that right, and again, that's where it comes in with wisdom and looking at me as an individual. Now what do I bring to this plate? For 22 years, again, I worked in public education. 14 years as a classroom teacher, 8 years in administration, serving as a principal, persistent principal, K-5 curriculum director, pre-K principal, alternative school, middle school, high school principal, homeschool director, hospital homeschool, system director, and if you have completely, lost your senses and want to go and look at my website and you find I can't sleep, you'll see a whole resume of stuff that I've done in education. And this is what this job, requires, ladies and gentlemen, because at the end of the day, we are electing your Georgia State Superintendent of Schools, okay? This person will have to look at policy, they will have to look at decision making that affects our kids, our teachers, and our schools. And that is what I've done, because my pre-K through 12th grade experience is all at the 12th, or all at the school level. Not at the central office, not at the state level. For 22 years, I dealt with our kids, I dealt with our teachers, I dealt with our parents. And I know what they face. And I know what works in education, I know what doesn't work in education. And one of the things that we used to joke about as a teacher, with our little group down there, said if we stayed long enough, or stood still long enough, the pendulum would come back and hit us. Because one of the things we face in education are fads. And one of the things I can bring is I can recognize some of these fads because I've seen them. At one form or another, they sometimes like to be repackaged and resold so somebody can make some money. But I guarantee you, I have the qualifications, I have the experience, I have the wisdom to recognize this and to bring Georgia and let's go where we need to go. You know, as I shared before, when we looked at Common Core and we looked at the wisdom there, I was the candidate that stood up. You know, you look at all my other opponents in 2010, I was the only one that was there. I was the only one that was speaking about it. I was the only one talking about it across the state. But that's because what you have is you have wisdom and you have visionary versus reactionary leadership. And I can tell you today that in the state of Georgia, we need visionary leadership. My name is Richard Woods. I appreciate your help. Go to my website, woodsforsuper.com. Thank you very much. You've been a gracious host.